Hello everybody, welcome again to a comprehensive music review, an album review that would be. And hello everybody who is new, my name is Nick. We like to do these because we are musicians, we are music producers, we're mixing, mastering aficionados, I guess you could say. Anyway, we like to do a lot of fun stuff, music related. So what better thing to do than to review albums that were just released and give a little bit of our opinion on that, seeing as how we have a little bit of a pretty varied music background. Well, with all that being said, let's get into it. So on May the 19th of 2023, we were given an album that was honestly quite a banger, and we'll get more into it in the review. But anyway, Sleep Token, a band from England, dropped their third album, which would be known as Take Me Back to Eden. And this album honestly was a reflection of how they've evolved as musicians from the start of the band into now as to how they've become so popular and why they've become so popular. So we're going to break it down in the same usual format that we do for these reviews, which if you've watched any of these other reviews, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll have seen this format before. So without any further ado, guys, we're going to jump right into it. Starting off with a general overview, this album it's kind of hard to describe. Let's just start with a couple of words that I can use to describe the album. Ambient, vibey, very spacious, emotional, mischievous even, if that's the right word to use for it. I don't even know. Regardless of all the words that you could think of, it is definitely, it's a pretty darn good album. There's definitely a lot of twists and turns, and there's definitely a lot of things in there that you wouldn't necessarily expect that they just so happen to pull off really well as musicians and as songwriters. I definitely think that they've mastered their craft as far as how they write music and how their style has been kind of forged out to be, and it's honestly paying off for them quite a bit. Overall, it is a pretty darn good record. I think that honestly they do a very good job expressing themselves and kind of getting the message across that they want to get across. But yeah, there's a whole lot more to that album that we're going to get into. Starting off with the music and mixing and mastering side of things, there's really not much that I can say. This album is great. It's mixed and mastered exceptionally well. All the levels are really good. The EQ format and designs that they chose are absolutely excellent. I don't know whether or not they just did a generic template, modern metal mix, or if they actually decided to do something a little bit different. All the sections are mixed exceptionally well. Everything's done to a very precise manner, and everything was done, it sounds very intentional. It doesn't sound like that they kind of just messed around and then they found something cool. It sounded like they came in with a plan, mixed this album really well, and it worked out really nicely. Everything about the way that things are mixed is just exceptionally done well. The toms on the drums are just so boomy and vibrant, and they give so much life to the mix. The guitars have just the right amount of heavy and rhythm to absolutely brutal, face-crushing tone, I guess you could say. It is really hard to describe exactly like what that guitar tone achieves. The parts that are supposed to be brutal, they're absolutely brutal. And then the parts that are supposed to be vibey and more emotional or whatnot, you definitely feel that emotion a whole lot more. And then the synth samples that they use as well, very, very tasteful. It's a very tasteful amount of synth that they use in the songwriting. It really does work out, and I think that it does a very good job complementing all the other riffs that they have in there. It's pretty well done. And I mean, vocally, obviously, none can compare. There's really nothing else to say about that there. I mean, like, vocally, it's top tier. But yeah, getting into the songwriting and the composing side of things, there's definitely a lot that this album has achieved as far as that's concerned. And there's definitely a lot that Sleep Token has done within the span of this album that has kind of set this album apart from all the other albums, and has kind of showed that they've progressed a lot as musicians. Like, if I was to take a look at their first album, what is this first album? The Sundowning, I think it is. The riffs and the songs that are on that, not really the same. They're a lot simpler. They're a lot easier to kind of digest. Whereas the ones that they use in Take Me Back to Eden, a little bit more complicated, a little bit more thought out and drawn out, and it shows you that they've obviously progressed as musicians. Now, there's a couple things structurally I would have done, personally differently with the song structure. There would have been certain parts that I made a little bit longer, and there's certain parts that I would have kind of maybe cut short a little bit, and, maybe not done certain parts in there at all. But yet again, it is not me who writes the music, it is Sleep Token, and Sleep Token does as Sleep Token sees fit. And they do a pretty good job of doing it. Obviously, people like it, and obviously it's something that they found some commercial success with. Something that I see used a lot as well in the composing side of things and the songwriting is they actually use, as I've discussed previously before, auto-tune, but they use auto-tune in the effect kind of way. Now, I've talked about this before with other album reviews. There are people who will use auto-tune because they want to polish up a vocal performance. And then there are people who use auto-tune as a vocal effect to kind of give a little bit of extra life and vibrance to a somewhat dull and maybe even lifeless, I guess you could say, kind of a mix. It kind of helps to bring a little bit of a new perspective onto things, and maybe is a little bit outside of the box and as compared to other things within the genre. So honestly, hearing Sleep Token use that in the vocal vocal side of things is kind of interesting, because I mean, already we know dude doesn't even need it. Vessel obviously has an amazing voice and he doesn't need auto-tune, but it's cool to hear an effect like that on some of the songs that they have on there. It's definitely very interesting. Compositionally, there's a lot of parts in there that relate to hip-hop and that relate to pop music and whatnot, and I think that that's all really cool. It's not necessarily my style. I mean, at least my style of hip-hop. I do like hip-hop, it's just I don't like the modern branding of it. But either way, it's still very exceptionally done, and it fits very well. It's nice and memorable. It's very well dictated and well orated. You can understand what he's saying. You can pick up on his words. You can actually very quickly memorize the verses and the choruses. The lyricism is something else entirely. Now, they have a certain image of the band that personally, I'm not a huge fan of. Me being the more traditional, like, just get up there and play guitar. You don't necessarily have to wear masks and everything like that. I mean, that's what they do. But, that's the image that they use for themselves, and that they found commercial success with that, like I've said before in other posts. So it works for them. I personally wouldn't do that. I personally would be fine with, ditching the image and just focusing straight on the musicianship. But they have decided to remain anonymous as a band, so I can see why they chose the image that they did to keep their anonymity. And you know what? Kudos for them. Hopefully it remains anonymous. I do have theories, though, as far as to who each of the members are, and I've done a lot of research into that, but I'm not really going to share those publicly. I'm going to more keep them to myself. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, the band has even said before they want it to be focused on the music, not the identity of the band members, and that's totally understandable. Looking at each instrument sectionally, everything's very well thought out. I would have probably liked to hear, if anything, some more complicated bass parts. Honestly, you can't really hear a lot of the bass guitar in there because it just kind of gets drowned out a little bit with the 9-string guitars that they use, and with the synthesizers and all that. They use a lot of sub basses in their mixing and all that, and that's all nice and cool, but having some good old-fashioned bass guitar wouldn't hurt the mix at all. If it was a little louder in the mix, I would like to hear that, but it kind of gets drowned out with everything else going on around it. When you're doing anything to do with EQ mastering and anything like that, you have to kind of find out where things kind of belong in the mix, and if, say, for example, your guitars are taking up a little bit too much of one section, it's drowning out the bass, that may affect the style and the feel of your mix a little bit. So more than likely that's probably what happened, but either way, it doesn't really affect the feel of the song. The song still gets the feeling across, but it would have been nice to hear the bass guitar just a little bit more, to be fully honest with you guys. And I've got nothing bad to say about the drums. The drums are just excellent. They're mixed really well, and the snare is just one of my favorite snare drums of all time. It sounds so phenomenal. It sounds really nice and full, really nice and snappy. Nice and perfect. But to bring things back in a general overview, this album is pretty darn good. It's not their heaviest album in their discography, but it has some of the heaviest songs they've written. Now, it's kind of also hard to argue that they have a heaviest album in their discography, because they're not necessarily a heavy band. They're not playing like straight up deathcore when they get on stage or anything like that. But they have songs that have elements of deathcore in it. They have elements of technical metal, groove metal, alternative metal, or whatnot, whatever you want to call it. They honestly have kind of invented their own genre, I guess you could say. I mean, not to sound cringe about it, but they've basically pioneered something new that you don't really hear a lot of nowadays, which I think is pretty darn cool. Not a lot of people really feel like very inventive. They kind of feel like they have to fit inside of a box. And I wish that more musicians would feel more comfortable jumping outside of the box to actually try something new. So that is definitely kudos to them. If you were to look at each song individually, there does feel like there's a lot of these little filler songs that are in there. And, it's okay. They're also very vibrant, and they kind of feel, they bring their own special element. I would say one song they probably could have gotten rid of is, how do you pronounce it? It's the one that's an acronym for Do You Wish That You Loved Me. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'll post the art right here, or when I get a chance to. They probably could have done without that. It doesn't really feel like that it fits the rest of the album. Kind of is like the little redheaded stepchild. I mean, you've got literally the second song on there is The Summoning. And that's like easily one of the heaviest songs on the album. Now, when I talk about how certain songs are a little bit of a shock to the system, you'll see what I mean when you listen to something like Take Me Back to Eden, their title track. Because most of the song is very vibrant, it's very ambient and spacious, and it's very much an emotional track. It makes you feel a lot more like you're watching something incredible happen. It makes you feel as if you're on top of this wave of emotion, and then all of a sudden, right at the end, it just blindsides you with this absolutely brutal, crushing, and heavy riff that just comes out of nowhere. I mean, the dude goes from straight up clean singing like 3 seconds ago to all of a sudden giving you some of the dirtiest vocals you don't even hear in deathcore. And I think that that's pretty darn cool, because they blindsided me with that, and they kind of faded out the song with that, and kudos to them. You don't really hear that a lot, especially from Sleep Token. So it was a welcome thing. But yeah, overall, excellent songwriting, excellent structure, excellent songs that are on the album. It definitely isn't, like I said, their heaviest album, but it has some of their heaviest songs, and it also brings a new layer to the band as well. So that's also something that we can look at and appreciate as far as that's concerned. It definitely shows you how they've come along as musicians and how they're constantly improving. Now, to give this album a rating, that is going to be kind of tough. Now, you'll know that the last album review that I did was Enable of Ascaris, and that was their album Exile. I gave that if I believe, a 9 or a 9.1 out of 10. It was a really high rating. Now, this album, it didn't make me feel the same way as Exile did when I finished listening to it. I kind of wish that I wanted a little bit more, especially after, you know, the closing track goes out with Take Me Back to Eden. Like, oh my gosh, after I heard that closing of the song, I wanted more of that. I wanted songs that were going to absolutely punch me in the face and shock value. I wanted something like that. I wanted something that was going to absolutely like blindside me. But I kind of felt like I was lacking that a little bit. Sleep Tokens found their style, but I would have liked to have more of those shocker moments like, oh, guess what? We can be heavier. I feel like that would have added an extra layer to the band that would have been a lot more embraced, and I would have felt a lot more like I liked the album. It would have pushed it up higher in the ratings, but as for right now, this album is going to get a 7.8 out of 10. Still a very excellent album, definitely a should listen and a should repeat and should put on playlists. It's absolutely excellent. It's a good album. The workmanship on there proves it to be a good album. So definitely highly recommend. And with all that being said, guys, we're going to cut the review right here. So don't forget to check out my other videos that I have on my channel. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And drop a comment down below what you guys thought of this one. And I'll see you guys in the next album review that we do. So thanks for sticking around. Cheers, everybody. And have a great rest of your evening.